Welcome to the Scottish Property Podcast. This is a show where we aim to educate, inspire and entertain through real life stories and interviews from people in the Scottish property community.
As always, thanks for listening and give us a follow on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Remember to join us at our monthly networking events on the first Wednesday of every month. Tickets are available on our website. So without further ado, we'll just cut straight into this week's podcast. Okay, welcome back everybody to our Scottish Property Podcast market update. We have Mark Shanta in the studio once again from Shanta Residential. How's it going?
Very well, thanks, Nick. Nice to see you, Stephen.
Back in the hot seat, mate. Good to see you again.
Back in the hot seat, yep.
He's always looking so fit and tanned and like just back from Tenerife and all that. Jealous of this guy, man.
What, like, a bit of winter sun?
My New Year's goals and resolutions didn't last very long anyway, so I posted a story the other day. I was eating boiled eggs and Rivitas. And last night we had a late night last night, Stephen. We were at the podcast networking events and I didn't get back till about 11 o'clock at night. I hadn't had my dinner.
So what did you have as a snack, Nick?
I was driving back, I was like, where can I find it? I found a kebab shop that was open and I got a don on chips. The guy gave it to me and I was like, no, I need a wrap as well. So he wrapped it up in this big pita bread, don on chips, salad and sauce. It was dripping all down my mouth, so that was mad.
Still a wee bit in your beard there.
so the health kick is out the window on day 10. What 10?
You're 11.
Exactly. So it lasted 2 days.
What about the fasting? How's that going?
The intermittent fasting, I actually felt brand new, by the way. So it was 16 hours fasting, 8 hours eating. I'd actually think that might be able to get back onto that because it was actually working for a while. But how's your New Year's resolutions going, guys? And
I'm interested to see what Mark's New Year's resolution is for someone that runs 50 miles for fun. Like, how do you make resolutions to get better?
So, I don't really tend to have resolutions. It's more sort of goals that I set at the start of the year. Right. Say, look, this is what I want to do this year. And some personal stuff, some fitness stuff, some financial stuff, some property stuff. So
I do the same, and I try and implement a standard each year. Just raise a standard on something.
Yeah. Like just what are they then?
So fitness wise, I'm doing London Marathon in April. So I want to do that in sub 3 hours. So that's the target, and that's what I'm implementing the training plan towards.
Have you ever done any of these big city marathons before?
Did Manchester last year.
Nice.
So Manchester was my first one last year. It was 3 hours 7. So I want to try and, it sounds easy to take 7 minutes off, but it's no. It's like, it's a lot of work. So doing that, and then I'm doing I don't know if you've heard of a wee place called Tyree. It's just up off, just up off the coast. It's 3.5 hour ferry from Oban, so it's right out in, but I'm going to Tyree in September and doing the ultra marathon there, which is basically a lap around the entire island.
Nice.
So it should be a nice wee event. I was looking at flights last night. Logan Air to Tyree, 45-minute flight, £270. You're like,
you can afford that.
The wee 10-seater propeller planes that.
I don't think the accountant will let me put that through Shannon Residential.
Business expenses. But listen, mate, I'll be sitting at the finishing line with my don on chips, waiting on you. There to support. Right, guys, we better get on some property stuff, right? So we're doing the market update. Now, we don't have a lot to go on because obviously we're recording this, early mid-Jan, so usually we do it at the end of the month where we have all the house price data and all that, so we don't really have huge amounts of data to go on, but we want to keep it kind of topical. We're going to give our market forecasts for the coming year because it's January. We like to just give a wee cheeky prediction as well and look back on our predictions from last year too, so that'd be interesting. And obviously there's a few topical news stories that we want to touch on, and loads happening for landlords and investors as well, which we'll get onto too. Kicking off with inflation, because I know it's a boring subject, but it does really affect obviously filtering through to mortgage interest rates and all the rest of it, and kind of public sentiment as well. So here we've got the Bank of England may cut interest rates sooner after surprise inflation forecasts. So they've gone round a lot of the kind of the experts, basically the economists, and they've got the kind of predictions for what the Bank of England are going to do. So it says here, the Bank of England may be forced to bring forward the date of its first interest rate cut after 3 leading forecasters issued a surprise update suggesting the inflation rate will halve to 2% by April. The Oxford Economics Consultancy and analysts at Investec and Deutsche Bank have reassessed their outlook for inflation in 2024 and concluded that Consumer Price Index CPI, which dropped to 3.9% in November last year, will fall below 2% within 4 months. So that's unbelievable, because obviously from where we were, like we were up at like 10 plus last year.
Yeah, 10-11% in midway through 2023, weren't we?
2% is actually their target. So if they can get it back down to that, then they obviously need to start thinking about cutting rates.
Yeah, I mean, and what a welcome. That would be very welcomed within our industry, wouldn't it? It's just like, if you cut the rates, bring out more mortgage products or lesser, it stimulates buying. You know, stimulates buyers, stimulates the market. House prices hopefully will fall and will increase slightly.
I was a bit dubious when I heard that. Like, I know there's a lot of elections coming up this coming year, starting in America, starting then the UK, and you're thinking, fuck, they don't want to see any kind of instability in the economy. Is it falsifying? Is it generally what you see?
That's the one thing that I think that rocks the housing industry is uncertainty. You know, that's over the years when there's uncertainty with increasing interest rates during COVID. That's when you're having these dips. People they're get all cautious and they're like that. Right, I'm not really sure what's going on. We're going to park our idea to move. We're going to stop the idea of buying just till we see a bit more confidence.
It's funny you were chatting about that, like predictions and market prices before we went on air, and you really can, and it's such micro economy. I mean, even inside a city or an area, you can then even break that down further. And what you just reminded me when you were saying that, there was a few houses near me that went on the market a few months ago, and this is stuff that would sell within a week, a couple of weeks, even in a bit of uncertainty, and it sat for a few months running up to Christmas. I thought they're really good properties in really good locations, good schools, the stuff that would sell. And I think the uncertainty towards the end of last year didn't, and I was surprised. I drove past them yesterday, both of them sold. And I think because there's not much uncertainty been happening in January, there's quite good news coming out a lot of the time.
Well, these news headlines, I mean, we'll see what happens, because obviously, like over in the States, and we usually follow the States as well, they're talking about really cutting interest rates already as well, bank rates as well. So this will be really interesting to see how this plays out over there. What you were saying about the election coming up this year, so like, I mean, it is playing into Rishi's hands at the moment, because he did come out and say that he would have that inflation figure down, I think halved to like 5% or something. That he managed to, well, I'm saying he managed to achieve it. Obviously, it's not really him that's pulling the strings.
I think Rishi's a dead man walking. I think there's nothing he can do. He's gone.
We'll see.
I mean, that could be the most. This could be me cut to in 9 months' time or whatever, saying he's turned it around. But I think there's no way that the Tories will get re-elected.
There's too much scandal, isn't there? No, they kind of destroyed themselves last year with all that. But
they keep on losing all these by-elections, and if you look at their projected poll figures, they're down like 25-30%. So I think
he's trying to hold off. Did you see he's trying to hold off to the last minute?
The very last minute. So what other parties are calling for is election in May, but what I think that they'll do is they'll drag it out into October. I don't know that
to try and recover.
Well, this is what they're hoping for.
Trying to recover.
This will be back down to 2%. That's what he's
thinking
hoping
about, trying to find some scandals.
So then they'll come in and say, we saved it. We managed to cut inflation from 10% down to 2%. Did you? You didn't have anything to do with it. It's actually out with your control.
I think that the good news for people is that the interest rates seem to have peaked. And the thought and the sentiment is they're going to start. There's a downward,
and you're seeing that in the mortgage rates that are coming out now. Like they're already dropping.
5.25% is the CPI. So a lot of people saying that maybe it'll settle around about like 4% or something like that bank rate. And then obviously see how that filters through into mortgage rates. Should we get on at mortgages then? Because there's a few. I'll just read out the headline, because again, this is what I think is going to drive the housing market for the first sort of quarter anyway, and really I think things will be quite buoyant for the first quarter this year. So there's articles coming out here in the Daily Mail saying the best mortgage deals on offer as lenders slash rates in New Year price war, that sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? So public are picking these headlines up and going, right, they've been sitting out for the last sort of 6 months because interest rates were crazy, and then they're picking up these headlines and they're like, right, now's the time, let's get back in there.
So if you've got residential mortgages that are sub 4% now and the base rate's at 5.25, they obviously predict that it's going down.
It's going to go down, and it was funny, it's like at the end I listened to a previous podcast. Nick was saying his mortgage is up in April. Mine's up in May. He's 1.6. I'm 1.9. I'm like, this time it's
gonna hurt.
In June, July, I was like, oh my god, we could be in towards 7 or 8% here.
You ain't going to Tenerife this year.
No, not Tenerife, winter sun. But
Tyree's going to be the best.
It cost me as much to get to Tyree as to Tenerife. But now things are looking better. You know, it's like it might settle. You might be able to get a mortgage sub 4%. So obviously it's a big increase from where we're at personally.
It's a sigh of relief though, isn't it?
It is,
from where it was going.
Because there was that uncertainty where it's just like rates are climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing.
Yeah.
Now
has that been 3 pauses then? 3 pauses in a row?
Yeah, must be. But interestingly, at the last meeting, there was 3 on the panel. I think there's 7 or 9 members that sit on the panel to decide. And there was 3 that were still saying they wanted to increase rates.
Right.
So and I listened to a guy called Adam Lawrence as well, who I really recommend you follow. We've had him on the podcast. He's absolute genius when it comes to like economic stuff and tying in with property. And he was saying he's not quite convinced that, you know, rates are going to come, bank rates going to be slashed, because he's like, well, CPI, he says, a lot to do with so the price of energy and stuff like that is coming down, you know, fuel costs, food's coming down a bit. He says a lot of the CPI and inflation data is tied into services. So like obviously wages have gone up so much that he was saying that will be really hard to get down. So this idea of, because if it's 3.9% at the moment, that's still like nearly double the 2% target.
Yeah.
So if it's double the 2% target, then they still need to think about putting rates up.
Yeah.
So, but obviously these experts are predicting back down to target.
And I think that the good thing is it's like September, October time, everything, it was just trending upwards. And now we've hit a point where it's
really coming down.
It looks like it's going to come down, which in turn relates back to the property market. It brings a bit more sort of certainty to it. And
so what about this Paragon Byet product then? So there was a Paragon launched a buy-to-let, it was a 4.5%. But when I looked into it, it was
what was the fee?
The product fee.
5%. So if you're talking about a property purchase of 100 grand, I think I worked out if it's 75% loan to value, so 75 grand loan, 5%, you're about 4 grand on the fee.
The problem with that is that if there's a lot of investors that are buying tenanted stock, these products aren't stacking up because of the stress test.
Yes,
because they're such below market value rent if you're buying my sitting tenant, and because they couldn't get the rent up, that you're not, because we've just put through a whole lot more mortgages, and because we did a bit of variety of what we're putting on, we put a whole lot onto 5-year fixed to pass a stress test, and then we've got 7 more to go through. So we'll just put them on 2-year fixed, but none of them pass the stress test.
Yeah. But is that not the reasons the lenders are coming up with these crazy fees so that they can reduce their rates? So then it does still kind of work.
So but I think the headline figure of that looks quite attractive. 4.5%. The rates are back down, but really when you add a 5% arrangement fee onto it, it's not that attractive.
6%. Take that away.
So this was a question that came up last night's event in Glasgow. One of the audience came up to me and says, I've been listening to your podcast, absolutely brilliant. Stephen keeps on talking about buying below market value, you know, this like 20% below market value or 25% below market value. So
or 40.
You need to buy right. She says, so I'm just a bit confused. What about all the other fees? So the ADS, which is 6%, obviously mortgage fees and stuff like that, 5%. She says, do I factor all them into that percentage as well?
Yes, you do not pay these.
Right.
You take that off. If you're buying 100 grand property and you're paying 6 grand in ADS, you just take off 6 grand of what you're paying. These are all costs of business, your business. So if that's your criteria to get X amount of value on it or get the cash flow, you just need to buy it right in the first place. Unfortunately, you get a whole lot of rejections and a whole lot of no's. But
she was like, Stephen keeps saying this on the podcast, so what did I do? I was like, you need to ask him. Don't message me. I don't want to give you advice. No. I says to her, look, you need to start with the end valuation, what you're aiming to get, and then work back, chip away all the numbers, take away all your costs, and then you'll be left with a figure of what you want to offer.
Be conservative on the end valuation as well, because a lot of the narrative that we're hearing is the surveyors are down valuing a lot.
See, I'm still finding surveyors putting flipping like almost that inflated home report value of what things have sold for previous, which really isn't the case. And I think this is where people might get a little bit stung out if they're looking to do their due diligence and look at an end value. I went and saw an off-market one yesterday, And the surveyor put 150 grand on the end value, but I mean, he needed 40 grand spent in it, and I couldn't find much comparables above 165. So the surveyors took a little bit off the valuation based on, there's one similar for 165. Oh, okay, we'll call this 150. Well, that's inflated. That's an inflated price because, ADS on that plus your 40 grand spend. My offer was 108 grand. And they're like, oh, no, but we've been told it's worth 150. It's fucking not.
It's no way.
Like, no one's looking at that. And even a owner-occupier is not going to spend 150 on that because they need to spend a lot of money on the renovation. So I think they're almost following that little inflated bit. And I think you're right. I think that will end up catching back up and going the other way in the coming months. And if someone's predicting a higher valuation, they might end up getting caught out.
Yeah. I think as well, it sometimes comes down to luck, isn't it? Because no surveyors are the same. It's like sometimes when we release the keys for these end values, it's like it's not always the local surveyor that comes. It's like somebody from eSurf, London-based firm. It's not your shepherds from Kilmarnock Road and Shawlands.
I love it when I see a news of one and it's like a Glasgow surveyor that gets sent to Aberdeen. I'm like, yes!
You're going to be heavily leaning on him and saying, by the way, this is why we're doing here.
Moving on, guys. House prices, and we're going to give our predictions here as well. So we're putting you on the spot here, Mark. Right, and we will replay this episode in a year's time. Go. Right, so I had to replay last year's episode. So January 2023, we sat down with Sam Dyer to do the first market update of the year, and we actually never managed to squeeze it out. Sam, I think he kind of like.
Oh, there's a surprise. He gave you a Tory politician answer.
He just based politician answer. That's what it was.
I'm going to do that.
Totally dodged it.
6 paragraphs and didn't answer your question. Answered 3 other different questions.
But I managed to get out of you, and I threw one into the mix as well. So I said house price is going to be down negative 10% on the end of the year.
It's a surprise,
right? So,
there we are.
Negative 10. And interestingly, Stephen Clark, I'll give you the credit here. You said flatline, and it depends what house price index you're going to look at, but they pretty much did flatline in the end. There was some measured a small increase of like 1% or something like that. But you're bang on the money, mate.
I'm happy with that because I think in 17 years in property, I don't think I've ever been right on a prediction. So I'll take that.
That's why you're absolutely flying, driving a Porsche, and I'm fucking. Flying.
If this continues right, then Aberdeen might start going up and I'll be all right.
Yeah. So go to Stephen Clark for your predictions. So that was.
We spoke about this, or Keza Salimi mentioned this on last month's one.
As well.
Yeah, if you take into consideration inflation, there's the real value, isn't it?
Yeah,
so I think it's a good point.
In real terms, so this is where I'm going to try and save myself here. If inflation is at 10%. And I've predicted, house prices are 0%. Then in real terms, at the end of the year, they have dropped 10%.
But inflation would be 10% for the whole year, though. It would almost be
okay. So at the start of the year,
so you're asking me about prediction for 2023?
We'll get on to it.
24.
We'll get on it.
2024, right?
We'll get on to it. So basically, looking back to an article that I pulled out, which was in the Times. Not that I read the Times, it's a bit too intelligent for me, but obviously for the purposes of doing the research for the podcast. So the Times 2024, they've got a good article that goes around all the analysts and like Rightmove, Halifax, all these guys that come out with the house price predictions. And interestingly, they wrap it up. 2023, they were all wrong. So they all predicted a crash.
Nobody knows anything.
Right? So that was all the experts.
Yeah.
They were wrong. Stephen, you're right.
Listen to the fucking
you need to get a job as a chief economist with one of these.
I need to sell property training works or something like that.
So, and then like looking forward in 2024, they did a kind of wrap up of all these experts, and some of them are. In fact, all of them, again, are predicting in house price falls. Some of them are like 1%. Rightmove there, down 1% in 2024. Zoopla forecasting a 2% drop. Right, I'm going to put my prediction now.
Go for it.
Come on.
So now. I'm going to go. I'm trying to get rid of this negative Nick tag. Right?
He's going to say plus 20% just
positive, and I'm going plus 2%.
Positive Ponty. That's what
positive
we call
Ponty.
That
could catch.
Negative Nick and positive Ponty.
Right, so round the table, plus 2%.
I'm going to go for plus 5%.
Oh, nice.
And my reasons behind that is I think fundamentally, and we always come back to this, fundamentally there's a housing stock shortage in Scotland. Fundamentally there is. And I think that the news about the interest rates coming down will stimulate more and more buyers coming into the market, increase demand, and I think that prices will increase.
You can't copy any of us now. You need to come up with your own.
I was going to agree with. I've got a slight twist, and I'm going to be. This is probably going to be a cop out. I kind of agree with Mark that there's going to be an increase because our shortage. The fact it looks like interest rates are falling, it'll probably stimulate and grow. But I think the headlines when we revisit this in a year's time will be a flat line only because they'll be following the data from the hot market we've had, plus 10%, plus 15%. So when they see that drop, which a drop of 10% might just look like a flat line, but in reality, it's a drop.
Right.
But I think the data will say a flat line. But I think that would be a -5 to 10% drop.
You've confused me there.
I've confused myself.
I'm going 5% from where we are now. I think that's it.
12 months on, right? Okay.
But I don't know.
Office for Budget Responsibility, which is the government kind of agency, it does all the government numbers for the budgets and all that. They're predicting a 4.7% fall. But again, it's like you rightly said, Mark, you know, all these kind of averages, UK averages and all that, they don't really mean much in terms of like...
No. What I was saying before we came on was, if you look at your own market, like in Glasgow, we've got South Side, we've got West End, both buoyant. We've got the North Side city, East End of the city. Even in your South Side, street to street, area to area, it all changes. You get some houses in some areas that are just booming that you can guarantee they will still go to a closing date and still get 10% above home report value. You've got other areas, maybe within a couple of miles, that you think, right, we'll get home report if we're lucky here. So it does depend. It is. I know we're talking as a whole average, but it really does. You have to drill it down even further than that into area, and then into even further than that into street by street. Brilliant.
Yeah, I agree. Like if you're looking at it, don't look at it as a broad spectrum. Look at it, your own area where you're investing. Drill down deep.
Okay, moving on to a wee bit of breaking news here, which just happened in the last 24 hours.
Do we know, have we prepared for this breaking news?
I've not sent you this one just to put a wee curveball in here. LHA rates. If you're listening to this and you have tenants that claim universal credit on benefits, this is going to be really interesting to you. So we knew about this because they announced in the autumn budget, but it's taking effect from April, and these are local housing allowance rates for tenants claiming universal credit. What they basically get for their housing part, their universal credit, is going up. They've had a review and they're doing an increase. I mean, they had to do a review because the last time it was set was like 2020 or something like that. So, and we know what's happened to rents over that last 3-4 years, you know?
I think that the increase in these local authority rates is a positive. And reason being two things. Firstly, it's positive for the tenants. It's a positive for the people who are on these local housing rates. Because what was happening is that traditionally your ex-council stock, the local housing tenant, they were getting priced out of being able to rent a property. So, you know, their rate might have been $650 historically, but that 2-bedroom was on the market in a private let for $850, and it was just going to somebody else, and they couldn't afford it, so they've been getting priced out. And now in Glasgow, next year the figures, the 2-bed rate's going up to $850, which is much more in line with market rent. And the positive on that is not only for the tenants, but it's also for the investors. Because if you're an investor and you're getting one of these properties, and you're getting one of the local housing authority tenants in, they're actually the best type of tenants you can get. Do you know, they're the sort of tenants that are going to be staying there for a long, long time, treat the property like it's their own, and they're paying up towards more like market value. So
I heard you guys saying that the Glasgow rates looked like they were more in line with the market, and we just had a brief look at Aberdeen and Dundee. Dundee, interesting, because I was at the Scottish Property Podcast Network event in Dundee with Kessler and Neil. They were sharing the LHA rate, and the 1-bed's coming in at $399. but the cheapest property they could find, one bed in Dundee, was 525, and there was one that was at 900 quid. So they're saying that the LHA rates came nowhere near the market value rent, which is still an issue.
That's interesting in Dundee. So they're supposed to take into account, it's called the 30th percentile or something like that. So basically the rate that they set is supposed to be affordable for the lower 30% of the market. So the 30% of the cheapest properties on the market, that rate they should be able to afford.
It sounds like if you look at it from council to council in this document, I don't know if you can put in the show notes or something for people to look at, but if you look at it council to council, it does vary. And it sounds like Glasgow looks like it's more in line with the market, whereas areas like Dundee and Perth, from what we've just seen from the headline, it's not.
It looks like Aberdeen's a bit out as well by about 100 quid. The one bed's at 475 and the two beds are at 650. That's probably 100 to 150.
I think there was tenant groups coming out quite quickly saying that this is still not good enough.
Really? Is that what their narrative?
So still sort of saying picking cracks in this because, like you say, there's nothing on there in that price level. I would say 850 for a 2-bed in a kind of a poorer area, maybe a more.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at an ex-local authority,
you could get a good return.
Then I think that it's roundabout.
That's in Glasgow. I mean, that's gone from 693.
693.
695 or something like that, up to that is pretty good. Did you see the 4-bedroom rate in Glasgow? £1,800. Let's see if we can get a few 4 beds.
Wow.
I know, that's.
Tenant groups will be listening to this podcast if they do. Going greedy landlord.
£1,800 for a 4-bed.
That's a lot, isn't it?
I mean, you'd stick out a mile, you'd see them on the right move to rent, and you see it up at 1,800. But as we talked about previously, it's like if you're a landlord and that's your strategy to buy a 4-bed to try and take advantage of the £1,800 market rent, your challenge is to try and find a tenant that ticks all these boxes to get this £18 rent, because nobody else is going to afford it. It's not going to rent privately. So you've got a very, very, if that's your strategy, and I know there are some people out there who are doing it, you've got a very, very niche selection of not only properties, but a niche selection of tenants who are actually going to be able to qualify for that criteria.
And remember that £1,800 is dropping in the tenant's bank account first of all before it gets to you.
I had a question for you guys as investors and I suppose as letting agents. When we were looking at the stats yesterday and talking about Dundee and Aberdeen and even Fife focused, the LH8 rate wasn't as good as Glasgow and it wasn't coming up, but the prices of your standard 1-bed flat, even if let's just pick Dundee since it's fresh in my mind, at 525 to 900 quid for a 1-bed flat, does this become so unaffordable that almost professional HMOs become a thing in Scotland? Because the reason I'm asking is Neil shared a 4-bed or a 5-bed obviously HMO in Dundee, and it was working at 460 a room, and I thought, well, if you can't afford a flat on your own, do you start going, well, I need to share, I need to go in an HMO, and does that become a strategy that becomes popular in Scotland?
Possibly, but I've always thought that the HMO strategy up here it's a lot different from down south. There's a lot more hoops you've got to jump through up here in terms of following fire regulations. And I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. Fire regulations, enough worktop space.
I'm just thinking like not only the affordability, but the stock, the housing stock as well. The fact we've got none. There was a guy from Dundee City Council there yesterday, and he said there's 8,000 people on Dundee City Council's waiting list for a council house, and there's only 62 properties on the market, up from 34 last month. So 62 properties available in the private rental sector and 8,000 people on the waiting list. I
think there's no doubt there would be the demands. I mean, communal living, I think there would be the demands. Young professionals, single people, I think they'd be quite willing to share a house.
Interesting if anyone's doing that.
How do you see it in, like, obviously you've got that big HMO up in Aberdeen. Could you see that working for young professional market? If you basically could make another one of those buildings, would you feel confident in going down that route?
Yeah, put in the city centre, a professional setting, possibly.
It's just getting the type building, isn't it?
That's what I was going to say. See in England, you see all these old Victorian houses, you just see rows and rows of terrace houses, and what they do is they plan and they're able to split them
6 beds into them, and
in Scotland we've got tenement flats or we've got new builds, it doesn't really lend itself to that strategy unless you get a unique building.
I think what gave me the idea was I wondered about the old, above the high streets, almost the old storage spaces above the high streets, like the big spaces that you can convert into 4, 5, 6 bed, HMO flats that professionals would share. But I wondered if anyone's done it or anybody's doing it.
They need to relax the
them.
planning laws because up here it's just ridiculous, so outdated. England, they've brought in this year like more permitted development rights and that, so they're a lot better down there in terms of that sort of stuff. But
I think anything the government can do in Scotland to encourage house building and development into residential premises, and you're right, maybe some of these vacants in the high street is a good, if you could be incentivised to do that in some way, maybe almost bring back some of the high streets to life a wee bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
We drifted off topics there, but getting back to another news story, moving on, you sent me this one, Mark, very kind of interesting actually, but we need to watch what we say because we don't want to, we've all got our opinions, but we need to watch because this is on record now, so we don't want to be get any complaints from anybody. But administrators ponder how to support buyers after Stuart Milne Group collapse. So this is about Stuart Milne, the builder, basically going bust.
I know, it sounds like an absolute disaster. What I read, 200 full-time jobs going. There must be
217
thousands of
subbies.
And then
building sites left unfinished,
buyers left with deposits.
It's big. They're one of the biggest builders up in Aberdeen,
and you wonder the reasons behind it. And obviously, you can speculate or you could read what people think on LinkedIn or whatever. But the bottom line is that it's affected a lot of people, and you wonder if there would have been a way for it to be saved during administration, or could the government have stepped in, because we keep going back to it. We need more housing in Scotland, and houses.
But is this a sign of times? Is this because of rising interest rates?
Well, that's what's interesting about this article is it's an isolated incident. It's maybe not a talking point, but is it the start of the dominoes away to start toppling?
It's like we don't know where we sit right now in January.
Is this the cracks starting to appear? So
it's not only the rising interest rates; it's the cost of materials. Any builder or any developer will tell you how much materials have gone up over the last couple of years. So
we've mentioned this a few times on the podcast, like the last year, cost of materials, officer prices have moved flatlined. So the only thing that eats into it is profit margin for these companies.
It says here Stuart Milne Group was up for sale and following significant interest, 2 bids were submitted. The bank has not accepted either bid and withdrawn its funding. So that was the kind of reason that was given.
Stuart Milne personally has had his house up on the market for over 2 years in Aberdeen. I think it's the most expensive property in Scotland. It's about 7.5 million. You can look it up online. So I don't know if he was just looking for a clean exit to sell up and vacate the Monaco. And
I did say that he was worth
I consider him
100 million.
Yeah.
But it's interesting looking into his backstory. It started as an electrician.
Yeah.
Aye, that's how he got into house building. And obviously,
what if we get him on the podcast?
Chairman of Aberdeen. Football club at one point. I think he's just in the director. One of the directors.
But UK wide, actually, you were saying obviously their headquarters are in Aberdeen, but UK wide, so they'll have sites all over the country.
I think the bottom line is it's very sad for the people who've lost their jobs, the people who are buying houses, and the one to kind of wrap it up is the one unknown that we don't know right now is this an isolated incident, or are more builders going to follow?
So that's why I like getting Mark into the podcast, because he always sees the human side. We're always too focused on the numbers and the business.
This is it.
Mark's like, well, rightly so. There's 200 people there with families, jobs, livelihoods, mortgages to pay, who are going to be struggling there. So thoughts out to them, because there was an article in the paper there. One guy who'd like 3 kids or something like that. His wife had died like a year ago or something like that. He's just been made redundant. Stuart Milne, like, where'd you go?
Yeah, a lot of people affected.
Hopefully they'll be able to pick up work though. or it gets somebody picks up the development.
Yeah,
Taylor.
Well, they're surely.
SOS.
I mean, well, exactly. That's going to be an opportunity for somebody there. You said you've already been on the phone, Stephen.
Stuart Milne's usually got a lot of part exchange properties where they'll take on their part exchange, particularly in Aberdeen, and then trade it on for a new build property. So yeah, I've already been in contact.
Right, okay, cool.
Not to be insensitive.
So, I mean, quickly, just to wrap up, because we've not got much time, but let's just, I mean, there's probably about 3 or 4 things that we could just mention. Changes in the private renting sector.
Yes. Okay.
This is a big one. We'll leave it till last.
I know. That's
So what's happening this year? What landlords, investors need to look out for?
There's 3 big things that I think people need to be aware of. I'll start with the biggest, in my opinion. On the 31st of March this year, 2024, the rent cap is coming to an end as we stand right now. The rent cap's coming to an end. So previously, there was an emergency rent cap where you could only increase rents by 3% during sitting tenancies.
Is that the eviction ban and the rent cap?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that is coming to an end on the 31st of March as we stand right now. So obviously, good news for a lot of landlords who were during that period hit with mortgage increases, which were well above 3%, well into double figures. So what's going to happen now is at this beginning of April, you will find that landlords will look to increase their rent, and they'll look to increase their rent more in line with where the market is. Mm-hmm. But the legislation, what it's saying is, if the tenant, there's no cap on how you're going back to an uncapped scenario where you can increase the rent by as much as the landlord likes. But if the tenant disagrees with that, it'll get referred to a rent officer, and the rent officer will make the decision about how much the increase is going to be. So advice as we stand right now is, landlords, when this comes out, don't go crazy. Yeah. Don't go, I've got a £600 a month rental right now and I'm going to put it up to £1,000 a month because that's what we're seeing. Mm-hmm. Follow 10%, follow something sensible.
They're saying 10 to 15% max, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Don't go crazy with it, because you'll just end up with the rent officer who nobody knows who it is. The rent officer is. Guy. If you're the rent officer, can we have a name, a location,
can we get you on the podcast?
So don't go crazy with this. Think about it from the tenant's point of view as well. And make it a sensible decision, and explain your decision why you're going to need to increase the rent.
You have to give 3 months' notice to raise the rent, don't you? Yeah. So I don't see, I know a lot of people are holding off until the 1st of April to start putting the rents up, but why not put it up now and start getting
once per year?
So you need to wait till the 1st of April to give the 3 months.
Why not give your 3% notice just now?
You could do 3%.
Yeah,
do 3%.
But most people are
holding off to do more.
Yeah. So if you get £600 a month.
But you put it up 10%, but you wait. You put it the 1st of April, and then you give 3 months' notice. You're into July, August before you get your 10%. But if you put in your 3 now,
are you
as better off? And
depends.
But then you'll only be able to do
another one
another year's time. So
it depends where you're sitting. I mean, they did say that they think that the maximum you're going to get is, if it does go to the rent officer. Then the maximum the reckon's going to get is 10 to 15%.
Yeah. So be sensible with it.
Yeah.
If you're a landlord, you do it for a reason. Do it because your costs have increased. Mm-hmm. Don't just do it because you now can. Do it because costs have increased and your rent that you're receiving it is less than what the market rent is.
I would say value your tenant as well. If you've got a tenant in there, look at the situation. If the tenant's been in there 5 years and there's never been any bother, but you are behind, obviously you might need to have a chat with the tenant and say, look, I need to put this up 10%. If that's going to be doable with the tenant, then fair play. But, the likelihood is, if that tenant's not going to make that jump and has to move out, then you're probably going to need to spend a fair bit. If it's 5+ years, new carpets, redecoration, all the rest of it.
Think of that bigger picture.
Kind of weigh it up a little bit.
Come up with a strategy. If that's the way that you're going to do it, don't go in heavy-handed at the start and whack it up by a lot.
I agree with that. Yeah, and as well, I think if you look at your portfolio holistically and not looking at it as an individual unit, if you think, some might be below, some might be not, but if there's ones like you say that are struggling, or you're kind of pushing a tenant, can you put another one up rather than that one? And I look at it, I think, as a wider picture, not just we can. Let's rank them all up.
So that's one. The second big thing that's coming in is the requirement as of the 1st of April to have RCD protection in every single board, electrical board. So previously, they would go down as a C2 on the EICR. If you don't have your RCD protection, go down as a C2. A recommendation to upgrade. Now that's changing with the new repairing standards, and that is going down as a C1, which means that you must have on your board RCD protection. So landlords out there or agents out there should now be checking their EICRs and seeing if there's a mention of RCD protection, and if they are and you've got RCD protection, then great, then that's fine. If you don't have any RCD protection, then it's something that you'll need to rectify. You'll need to get a new consumer unit in. So that's quite a big thing, because it's quite costly. You're probably to change a board at around about £500. So it's quite something that you need to take into consideration. And then the third thing, which I know you've touched on before, is the lead testing. So I don't know how much detail that you want to go into the lead testing.
Let's just say it's something that all my landlords will be getting a letter out in the next week, because we need to get our ass into gear with this, because any properties before 1970
or something like that.
Apparently lead pipes
lead
pipes get banned after 1970 or something like that, but there's different ways of doing it. But some people are saying Scottish water, but I honestly think that going down the Scottish water route is going to be hard work, because they need to go out and arrange a visit with the tenants are working and all that. They're not going to be in, so
basically, just a quick recap on the lead testing is that every property, and this is just a one-off, it's not to be an annual check, every property after 1971 is going to need to be tested for lead in the water supply.
Did you get prices, or was it Craig Gallagher that got prices? You said it was about 40-50 quid to get it done at a lab in Glasgow. It wasn't a huge cost, but it needs done.
Craig was looking into setting up their own lab as well. But the big thing on this is then if you do find lead in the water supply, it's your responsibility to fix it. Now, the biggest issue is if you have lead coming in the mains water supply and you live in a tenement flat,
who's responsible for it?
Who's responsible for it? Because the private sector's not doing this lead testing. It's only the rented sector. Yeah. So you're going to go around to all the landlords and say we need to upgrade this pipework here. Sorry, all the owners. They'll be like that.
Piss off.
This is going to be thousands. What are you talking about? So I don't think this is very well joined up thinking by the Scottish Government at all. But I don't understand as well why it's one rule for the rented sector.
I've heard of tests getting done in like 120-year-old tenement blocks that are clearly lead pipe and there's no lead. It's not came up a positive lead test. So it's a bit unknown. It's a bit like I'd say unjointed, but I don't think it's a panic thing.
No, I don't think so. And other thing,
just
the skeptical mind in you says, what's going to stop somebody not going to the tenement and sending in, getting a bottle of Evian and putting it into it? I'm looking at next bottle. Sorry, Evian right enough. But what's going to stop people?
What's that test tube?
What is going to stop people from doing that? It shouldn't be done, obviously, but it's. There will be big issues with this if in the tenement buildings they come back.
You hit the nail on the head though. It's like the smoke alarm things, and they put that in the private rental sector, and then 10 years later they put it into the private sector. It's like, why not do it at the same time? If it's a responsibility, if you could be lead poisoned, why the fuck is it okay for you to live and own your own property and be lead poisoned? But if you rent a property, you cannot be poisoned by lead. It's like,
and there's one rented property in a block of 8, and the one rented property in that.
They're protected.
It's got to go and do it, and then it falls on that one owner to get this organised. And what happens if you get pushback or no payment?
And how many people do you know that have died of lead poisoning?
None. I know none have died of Legionella either. So we're all on board with the
repair standards, and
the electrical and the gas safety stuff.
Absolute no-brainer. Fire alarms, smoke alarms.
Absolutely.
But the Legionella, lead testing, it's like,
what next?
What is next?
What next? And just to finish off, because it's crazy stuff with the government, and obviously they're faffing about again with the EPC and all the rest of it, so they changed the thing again there. It was originally going to be 2025, now they've knocked it back again to 2028. So
This is just Scottish government.
Yeah.
again, it's the Scottish government. They're trying to come up with a new heating, whatever it is, bill,
Well, yeah.
a new law basically, which will eventually ban gas boilers. And the aim is that they think heat pumps are the way forward, but there's loads of experts out there that are like, this ain't going to work.
I think the lesson with this EPC is do it when you need to do it.
Yeah.
You know, so
Aye.
originally it came out for 2023. And imagine if you went and spent 10 grand upgrading your rental property to get past the EPC, and then it's another 5 years down the line. And then it could be another 5 years down the line.
Yeah. Don't worry about it. There's no point in getting hell of it.
No.
But like, obviously, it's good to have in the back of your mind when you're doing full refurbs and the rest of it.
Yeah,
putting
it,
in
right.
extra insulation, all that stuff that we've talked about before.
Or if you're starting on your
Do it.
portfolio and you're buying now, it's something that I didn't do years ago, but you now look at EPCs to check to see where they're at, to make sure they're not ridiculous. So yeah, it's worth having it in your wider scope. But yeah, I wouldn't be too caught up on jumping on it and, like you say, trying to spend 10 grand up front extra on something that might not come out for another 10
Wait and
years.
see what happens.
Yeah.
Wait and see what government.
Do
will
it
have come
after
in
you found lead.
2028.
After you found lead in your pipes, then you basically rip the flat apart and start again, and make sure it's an EPCC.
Rip the tenement apart, rip the whole block apart to get rid of the lead pipe.
True.
So
Right, that was brilliant. It's a wee bit of. We started off positive, which was good. I feel going into 2024, I'm definitely a lot more positive. The room was buzzing last night at the Glasgow Networking event.
So are you going to add a property to your
I might
portfolio
buy
in
a prop-
2024?
I might just buy a
was there
property
none in
this year.
2023?
No, but I told the audience last night I was getting hammered last night. Everybody's like, because we're all about. Darren Green delivered a talk about taking action and all this, and he kept on using me he kept on picking me.
It's not taking action.
Basically, like, don't be like Nick here and sit on the fence and get affected by the negative news and all the rest of it.
Man.
But I have my reasons why I didn't invest, and it was because my focus was elsewhere.
100%.
No, I thought property prices were going to drop 10%.
Investing took basically a pause, but the business obviously was my main focus, and the podcast as well.
You can pay a sorcerer, eh?
Well, somebody said that to me last night. Actually, I should be employing a sourcer. That's
You
what I
play a
should be
sorcerer and
doing.
you pay a letting agent.
Top UK podcast
That's
for
it.
property in the, I saw.
Do you know what I mean? So
We're going for the podcast this year. The big focus on
yeah,
this.
and the business is flying as well.
Yeah.
So I'm pleased with the way that's going. And I found out that I can actually make more money in business than I can in property. So I'm happy with that.
Short term.
Good. Aye. No, I mean, like we say all the time,
Yeah.
property is still number one.
Long term.
Long term, still number one way of building wealth, preserving wealth for the future. Let's end on that, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much, Mark. Appreciate
Cheers.
it.
Where can people, just quickly, people can find you at your office?
Yes,
Or-
I have an office in Newry, the suicide, or any of the sort of social channels. I think Instagram, Facebook,
Or at the finishing line in the London Marathon.
or at the finish line in some 3 hours, hopefully.
Good luck with that.
Cheers.
Cheers.